Andrew McGann is the accused Devil's Den State Park killer in Arkansas. He's now under arrest. He was busted at a barber shop. He's accused of stabbing a mom and dad to death who were just on a weekend hike with their young daughters. Could he also be the man who police say stabbed and killed a hiker at Devil's Lake State Park in Wisconsin nearly 5 years ago? What makes these cases so similar to the point that detectives are now looking into that possibility? We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Could Andrew McGann have struck years before he allegedly killed a mom and dad who were hiking with their young daughters at Devil's Den State Park in Arkansas? Detectives in Wisconsin are now looking into that possibility. I talked to a detective in Sauk County, Wisconsin this morning about the unsolved murder of a man named John Schmutzer. He was just 24 years old when he was stabbed to death inside Devil's Lake State Park on October 14th, 2020. Obviously, there is the similarity in the names of the parks: Devil's Den State Park in Arkansas and Devil's Lake State Park north of Madison in Wisconsin. Devil's Lake State Park is actually the busiest state park in the Badger State, and it was very busy on the fall day that Schmutzer was killed because it was prime leaf watching season, and so many people, detectives say, came to the park that day to see the changing leaves, driving from states away to do it. Police say it was at 11:38 in the morning, right at the middle of the day, that someone attacked and killed John Schmutzer. He was stabbed to death on Grottoes Trail on the south side of this state park. Detectives say there were no pictures of the suspect, but multiple people saw someone who is considered the person of interest to this day in this unsolved murder. Before I get to that description, it's important to compare how this case in Wisconsin's Devil's Lake State Park played out compared to the murders that McGann's now accused of committing at Devil's Den State Park in Arkansas. I also want to be clear before we go any further, Andrew McGann's not accused in this case out of Wisconsin, and the detectives that are working that case tell me at this point everything's preliminary and they're really just exchanging notes with detectives in Arkansas. McGann's currently being held without bond in Northwest Arkansas for allegedly killing Kristen and Clinton Brink on July 26th of this year in Devil's Den State Park in Arkansas. This couple had just moved to Arkansas with their young daughters. Clinton, the dad, was expecting to start a new job the following Monday as a milk delivery driver. Police say the couple were hiking in a remote part of the park. There was no cell service, and then McGann attacked this family with a knife. He allegedly went for Clinton, the father, first. At that point, Kristen, the mom, rushed their 7- and 9-year-old daughters to safety, and those girls provided key information that helped bring Andrew McGann to justice and into custody. Now, those girls were able to get to a visitor station and call 911. But Kristen, their mom, went back to try and help her husband, Clinton, and that's when police say McGann stabbed and killed her. McGann fled. Police say he did it in a black Kia sedan. It had the license plate covered with some form of black tape, but the fact they were able to identify it as a Kia helped them track McGann to a barber shop. In fact, McGann really didn't hide his vehicle. He drove that car allegedly to that barber shop where he was arrested on June 30th. It was parked right outside. He was just about 5 minutes into his haircut when detectives entered the barbershop and they put him under arrest. We talked to the barbers who were there that day, and they say what stood out to them was that McGann would not give his name, and he also didn't want any hair cut off the top of his head. And they told us they think that's because he wanted to cover his face as he was still on the run. Police believe they have a very strong case in Arkansas against Andrew James McGann. They say they have the murder weapon, they have DNA that ties him to the murders, and they also say he confessed to some extent while he was in custody. It's unclear specifically what he said. We have requested video of the interrogation, and one day, once this case is settled, maybe we'll be able to see that. McGann has yet to enter a plea, and he's being represented by a public defender. When he was on the run, police released this picture, allegedly of McGann in dark clothing on the day of the Brinks murders. They say it was a witness who took this picture of McGann from behind. Now, police had described the person of interest at that point as a medium-built white man wearing sunglasses, fingerless gloves, and he had dark clothing on with that backpack. Witnesses also say they saw him allegedly leave the park with blood on his face. You compare that description to the one that law enforcement in Wisconsin have put out to the public as they are working the murder of John Schmutzer at Devil's Lake State Park. Again, this was a murder back in 2020. The detective I talked with this morning say that witnesses call the person of interest in this case the runner. And the runner is still the person of interest in this murder to this day. Now, they don't have any pictures of the runner, but he is described as a 5'10" white man who was wearing all dark clothing and was seen running frantically through the park at the time of Schmutzer's murder in October 2020. Detectives say they do not have the murder weapon in this case. Now, we've been trying to put together the background of Andrew James McGann and understanding how he got to Arkansas, and Wisconsin may line up with where he was around 2020. McGann is a public school teacher by trade, which is disturbing in and of itself. He was going to start teaching at a public elementary school the week after his arrest in Springdale, Arkansas. When we first heard the name Andrew James McGann, we put his name into truthfinder.com, and surprisingly, nothing really came up. And that says a lot because Truthfinder rarely can't find information on someone, and that's kind of a story in and of itself where it appears that McGann really tried to cover his tracks. Here at Law and Crime, we partner with Truthfinder. We use it to get details on the people involved in our stories, but even if you don't work in true crime, it can be an excellent resource to give you some peace of mind, as it is one of the largest public record search services in the United States. And with the paid subscription service, you get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone. And by the way, right now you can get 50% off your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/OTC. We found that McGann was hired by at least 5 different school districts between Arkansas, Texas, and Oklahoma just in the last 3 years, going back to 2022. Prior to that, we know that McGann grew up in the southwestern suburbs of Chicago, and we actually spoke to one of his childhood friends recently who said that McGann had somewhat of a very normal upbringing. He played Little League baseball. His dad was the coach of the Little League team. His mom was from Oklahoma, and that's why the friend believed he moved out west. Now, when I asked about what stood out to him now, thinking of Andrew McGann, the accused killer, he said without a doubt his anger was a major problem and it made people uncomfortable. He also said that at some point after high school, McGann cut off a lot of people that he spoke with, blocking them on social media, really out of the blue.
From what I know, people that were really close to him, they all lost contact with him. Like, I don't know what happened, honestly, but they said, yeah, he ended up blocking me or something, and that's what I've heard, so.
Now, it's unclear what happened in McGann's life for him to cut off so many people who he grew up with and what we've been told was a pretty close-knit community, and for him to move away from the Midwest. The suburbs of Chicago, obviously not that far from Wisconsin, and Devil's Lake State Park is a place where people from the Chicago area go to see the changing leaves and take in some nature in the fall. The detective I spoke to said one of the big challenges they've faced in this investigation is that there were so many people in the park that day, so many people that traveled from states away, that came, saw the leaves, and then went back home to wherever that may be, that it was hard to interview every single person who may have seen something. And there may still be people today who are jogging their memories, thinking about what they saw on that trip in 2020, and they are still hoping people reach out for information that could help them solve the murder of John Schmutzer. Now, this isn't the only cold case that law enforcement has contacted police in Arkansas about after McGann's arrest. Vermont State Police reached out about the October 3rd, 2023 murder of 77-year-old Honore Fleming. She was a former college dean who entered a hiking trail in Castleton, Vermont around 4 p.m. one day, and then she was found dead at 4:30 p.m. She had a gunshot wound to the head. This is the sketch that Vermont State Police put out almost 2 years ago. They also put out a description from witnesses, and they say the person of interest in that murder was described as a male, standing about 5'10", having short red hair, and he was wearing a dark gray t-shirt and carrying a black backpack. Now, even though that description does sound very similar to Andrew McGann, we admit it sounds like a lot of people. Police in Vermont say, after talking with Arkansas police last week, at this point, there is, quote, no known link between those cases. But we do want to say, if you have any information about the murder of Honore Fleming, contact Vermont State Police. Joining us now is retired police sergeant and cold case expert Troy Hillman. Thank you for taking the time to be with us on Law and Crime today. What are some of the similarities you see between this unsolved case out of Wisconsin and then what Andrew McGann is accused of in Arkansas?
Well, in both cases, you had a very brazen, broad daylight, it appears to be a blitz attack. And again, I don't know all the details, but it was the tool that was used was a knife in both cases, and it was somebody of somewhat of a strength and stature to overcome, grown adults. And in the case of Arkansas, two grown adults, and so you had somebody that was almost a predator type.
And when I talked to detectives this morning, they were in Sauk County, Wisconsin, they were very much saying, this is preliminary. We're exchanging notes, giving phone calls, and talking with some of the detectives in Arkansas. Take us inside those conversations typically. When you have a police department, you have this unsolved case, you see Andrew McGann, you see some of the details that's been reported as far as what he's accused of in Arkansas. What's the conversation like when you're asking questions, trying to figure out if there is a link to the unsolved case?
Yeah, they're definitely great to be cautious because you don't want to come out and label something as such beforehand, before. But I would say that they're asking questions about looking at his timeline of where he was. Could he have been in the area? Maybe looking at cell phone data, that kind of thing, just to put him there and kind of figure out where he's been, where he's traveled to. Obviously, both cases, it would have been probably somebody or somewhere that he was familiar with and felt comfortable in that environment doing what he did.
Yeah, and he was from the southwestern suburbs of Chicago, graduated high school sometime around 2015, but that's only a couple hours drive to Devil's Lake State Park in Wisconsin. What stands out to you as someone who's investigated not only just crimes, but cold cases when you look at Andrew James McGann and what he's accused of in Arkansas?
Well, I think you look at if you're going to go out and commit a murder, typically the way to do it, usually with strangers, would be use a gun because it doesn't involve getting up close, personal. Typically, with a knife attack, you in any kind of struggle, you injure yourself, and typically the perpetrator leaves their blood. So it's really not the number one choice if you're going to commit a murder. So in his mind, maybe there was some connection with the devil's name. I don't know how much this is religious, but there should be a treasure trove, maybe looking at his social media, looking at his background, talking to friends, family, and kind of getting a complete picture of who this guy is and how he developed over time, because he would have developed if he did in fact do the cold case murder in Wisconsin, then he was probably growing a little bit more brazen as he was working his way, what a profiler once described to me as the helix, basically working his way down that, just basically becoming more brazen and attacking at will multiple adults.
And there was the other cold case that Vermont State Police say that there's no known link to it. But in that case, Honoré Fleming was killed with a gunshot wound to the head. In the case of John Schmutzer out of Wisconsin, that was a stabbing. In Arkansas, it was a stabbing. When you see cases and you're investigating a cold case and you're seeing if there is a link to other crimes, how often is the cause of death similar between those types of cases?
Definitely perpetrators can switch it up, and you never want to lock in on one and rule out somebody based on, hey, this has to be, this is his, this is how he likes to do it. He likes to stab, and it's going to be that way every time, because they can switch it up, and they have switched it up. But definitely a perpetrator, typically they stick with what they're comfortable with, and maybe he had knife training or something. That knife meant something to him. He probably would have used the same knife, I'm just guessing. And so those are the kind of things you kind of hone in on. But again, it's incredibly important to keep an open mind. And what I would come back to here is the DNA. The DNA doesn't lie. It's probably the best tool in the chest, so to speak. But everything else should start to line up if, in fact, he was good for that cold case back in Wisconsin.
In the Wisconsin case, I mean, we often hear about the first 48 after a murder, and we're talking almost 5 years that this case has gone unsolved. What are some of the biggest challenges law enforcement face as time goes on?
Witnesses forget. People kind of spread out all over the country in cold cases. You're sometimes different people that were involved that are able to testify die and or are not available. So there's just a host of challenges. There can also be degradation of the evidence. We found that typically, though, back in the 70s and 80s when we looked at DNA from there, that time period. But typically, yeah, there can be a lot of things that can go wrong, much more challenging than, say, like you said, 48 hours or maybe even a year out. You get a lot more. It gets cumbersome as the days go by.
And when I talked to someone who also covers, works cold cases last week, they were talking about how over time, for when you see some of these cases and when a break comes, and it might be, you look at the suspect and how they acted in the years after, and maybe in some cases you have a suspect that might have a conscience and the weight of it just changes the way that they act. What are some of the things you look for in suspects who potentially years later could be linked to a cold case?
Typically, they like to maybe follow the crimes and typically check in on the status of a cold case. So that typically is kind of again, will be buried in their kind of history, maybe even their search, Google searches and that kind of thing. They'll like to know exactly, like I said, keep in tune with investigations and where they're at. So to me, that would be kind of something that needs to be looked at.
And then I think just as an investigator yourself, and especially when you're covering a high profile case or even a case like what happened in Sauk County, Wisconsin. I mean, it's a place where people go and check out leaves when they change. I mean, it's a very peaceful place, a state park. And you have this crime, which appears to be on someone who the victim never met before. It's a similar case in Arkansas. As time goes on and some of these cases come cold, what is the pressure like for those who are inside the police station and inside the rooms where you're going through evidence and trying to figure out what actually happened, I think past that first 48 hours?
I think there's a lot of frustration in terms of there's this pressure, but you want to make sure you get it right. And you want to make sure you have things lined up, because the last thing you want to do is arrest somebody and then have that attacked and them get let off or acquitted later on down the road. So you want to take your time. You want to be methodical. You want to have your ducks in a row, so to speak. But yeah, there's this pressure from the public of, hey, are we safe? You have a relatively safe park, and we want to make sure that we can engage in recreation there and safely. So yeah, there's a lot of pressure, and I feel bad for a lot of investigators because they're human, and that's not usually never brought out. It's they're trying to do the best. They're afraid for their families, like I was, and kind of they're working their tails off to try to get it right. But sometimes there's just nothing there, or there's nothing to go on.
Because I also think of just the challenges of where these crimes took place. And we often take for granted, I feel like, in the public. I mean, they were able to solve this case in Arkansas within 7 days. Double murder, this person who sped off, and they, were investigating in an area that didn't have any cell phone service either. And they talked about that being a challenge, and they were able to overcome it. What are some of the challenges you see when a crime like this happens in a state park and you don't have the murder weapon and the person's able to get away?
Yeah, first of all, it was random. It was a random attack. To me, that's even more difficult, because usually you can go back and you can radiate out from the victims and what we call victimology and kind of figure out, well, why would this person have beef with this person? Where would the motive be? But this was random, so it made it more difficult. There's lack of surveillance cameras. You don't know who's going and coming from the park. It's easy to hide. And somebody that blends in as a hiker is not going to really stick out. Although I think this individual, there were witnesses that said that he had tears in his clothing and looked disheveled and looked in a hurry, and maybe was wearing a hoodie, something to that effect. So certainly it is difficult outside, no surveillance. Again, broad daylight, which is amazing that somebody would be brazen enough to do that.
Well, and I think you bring up kind of the description of the suspect in Wisconsin, and it was a 5'10" white guy who was wearing dark clothing. And that does line up. I mean, it's very similar to the description that eventually became, according to police, Andrew James McGann. On the other hand, you could say, a 5'10" person with white skin wearing all black, and that could be a lot of people. Um, when you're an investigator and you're trying to put information out to the public, I mean, what goes into the idea of whether you're going to put out a sketch, you're going to put out pictures? In Arkansas, they kept things very close to the vest for a while until there was actually an arrest. What goes into determining when you're trying to get the public on your side, how much information they need to know as the investigation's going on?
Well, I think investigators typically err on the side of caution. They want to keep things close to the vest in case the killer does confess, because they want to, when they get them in the interrogation, they want to line things up. So to me, that's important. But at some time during the investigation, you said, hey, putting this out, could this sketch of, say, a knife or a redressed, in our case, we used a redressed bodysuit back in the day that the killer used. Would that help? And ultimately it did. Calls came in. So to me, it's just kind of weighing. You don't want to give away everything, because there are a lot of people that want to, in these high profile attacks or murders, they want to insert themselves and they want some type of notoriety. So you'll have false confessions, and then you'll have detectives going all over trying to interview these people that really aren't involved. And that takes time and energy away from the investigation. So you don't want to give too much out, but you also want, like you said, you want the public on your side. You want transparency, but you also have to keep things back. So it's not a hard and fast science by any means.
Andrew McGann had no criminal record. From people we've spoken to, he had somewhat of a normal upbringing in the southwestern suburbs of Chicago. But also he's accused of randomly attacking this couple in Arkansas that were just walking through the park and killing them in a very violent way with a knife. How common is it that you see a crime like this with Andrew McGann, and potentially, and we don't know at this point, but that he would have acted again at another point in time?
To me, there's got to be, and whether they're hidden or not, and I don't know. I haven't read, the case file, but to me, there's got to be more information on him. There's got to be something, and I'm not a psychologist, but I have dealt with a lot of forensic psychologists and profilers. There's got to be something in his background that basically created this deviancy, because it just doesn't. You just don't snap typically one day and say, I'm going to go attack somebody with a knife, or a couple with children. It's just so far beyond the norm. So to me, there's stuff that's maybe missing in his background that has yet to be discovered. And again, I'm not a forensic psychologist. I could not tell you more than that, but that would be my line of thinking on that.
And then for you, Troy, I mean, you've worked your career. I mean, you helped solve these cold cases. What is it about these types of crimes that you're passionate about?
To me, these are, and not to denigrate the normal homicide, because those are incredibly important. And if regular, I call them regular, homicide investigators don't do their job on the front end, then cold case investigators can never do their job. But I found cold case investigations to be very, very challenging. There were ups and downs, but the moment you were able to knock on a door and tell a mother that had been waiting for 25, 30 years for at least some type of delayed justice or answers, that we had found the bad guys. I mean, to see that look on her face, that to me was the most rewarding part of my career. Just to be able to do that. Everybody else had kind of given up hope, but we kind of stayed at it and never gave up. And that's kind of my message going forward: is we can't give up on these victims and their families. And it's twofold, because you still have suspects out there running around that have gotten away with it once or twice or however many times, and they're balancing jurisdictions. So it's important, and it's important to, like I said, to make our community safe and to give these families closure.
Yeah, and I think even in this case in Wisconsin, John Schmutzer was 24 years old, and every day since nearly 5 years now. I mean, you just think of the pain that family has been going through, hoping for some sort of closure, some sort of answer. Troy, I know you have a book coming out. What do people need to know about it?
This book is written from my perspective with my team and how we assembled it. Two heinous murders in Arizona, 92 and 93, beheadings, serial killer redressing. And years went by, and we assembled this elite team, and we were able to go on a 3.5 journey and track this guy who was allegedly dead down, and basically arrest him. And he's on death row in Arizona. But he was hiding behind a mask, and he was known as in cosplay as the zombie hunter. So my book is chasing down the zombie hunter, and it's out. It's due. The launch date is October 7th of this year.
Really looking forward to that. Sounds like a really important read. Troy Hillman, cold case expert, retired police sergeant. Thank you for helping us break this story down on Law and Crime. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Before we go, I want to put John Schmutzer's picture back up on the screen because his family is still waiting for justice. His murder is still unsolved. And if you have any information on what happened to John Schmutzer in Devil's Lake State Park in Sauk County, Wisconsin on October 14th, 2020, contact the Sauk County Sheriff's Office. As for Andrew McGann, he is expected in court once again in Arkansas this week on Thursday. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.